Welcome everyone. I am Meredith Helm. Most of you I know. Thanks for joining us today for this very relevant topic, in my opinion, on the role of diversity, equity, and inclusion in today's culture and ever-changing environment. One quick note, our next meeting is December 8th. And it will be a webinar meeting as well. So we will be sending out details about that upcoming meeting in the next 3 to 4 weeks. So we hope that you'll join us for that last meeting as well of the year. But without further ado, I will introduce you to Tiffany Cardwell, who I think probably most of us know her. She's a very prominent person in our industry. And if you've ever been to SHRM, you've probably been to one of her amazing breakout sessions and heard her speak. So Tiffany is joining us today, as I mentioned, to talk about DE&I, who in the ever-changing environment that we are in today. I would assume most of us are dealing with this in our positions, as I am, but I am super excited to have Tiffany speak to us a little bit more about that. And if we're not, then she's going to help us get focused on kind of where we can go from here. So I will turn it over to Tiffany.
Great. Thanks so much, Meredith. Can everybody hear me okay? Great, great. I'm going to share my screen, and as Meredith mentioned, I was really excited to be able to share this presentation and talk about it with everyone, just because, again, we probably have multiple hats, not just the compensation piece of things, and DE&I just in general has been a topic that has been ongoing for really the last several years. And one of the things that I've been seeing in the role that I'm in currently, where I work with different industries, different companies, is that discussion comes into, even though I might be working on a comp project specifically, that discussion comes into that analysis and taking a look at that type of information. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And hopefully that, can you see that, Meredith? Okay, great. Because I can't see everybody, so I'll be looking at you to let me know if there's anything that's not moving forward on that. And again, topic today is the role of diversity, equity, and inclusion in culture, because as we know, everything's been rapidly changing, right, over the last couple of years. In the first couple of slides, here's our agenda of all the different pieces that I'm going to be going through. And again, hopefully you'll take away from today the topic around DE&I and how you can take a look at that, not only in your comp work, but in any of the HR work that you're doing currently for the organization. But the very first thing, of course, is culture, and just making sure to think about culture as a whole. Because again, our culture and the environment we were in pre-COVID was working together, being in teams, maybe a little more formal, depending on where we are environment-wise. And then during COVID, it was all around this, right? Taking a look at what we needed to know, understand from the CDC. What are the, I mean, can you believe it's almost been 2 years? I still can't believe that it's been that long. But these are the workplace realities that we face. I'm not sure what industries everyone is in right now, but particularly retail, health, manufacturing, as you can see, even on the upper right there, where you've got, you know, technology associates and employees that are going to be involved with making sure that they have all the things that they need within the workplace. And again, it's eased off a little bit, but you know, it's still where we are with a lot of locations. So the first thing I'd like to ask from the group here are, when you think about culture, what are some key factors for culture to become effective and impactful within a work environment? And again, I know not everybody has their camera on, which is okay, but if you don't mind just kind of unmuting and sharing that would be great, or put your hand up, whatever might be easiest for everyone, to kind of share some of those key factors that you think are effective and impactful.
I would certainly say inclusion.
And when you talk about inclusion, Meredith, what are some of the things that come to mind?
Just creating an open, communicating environment so folks feel like that they can share ideas and be heard.
Great. One of the most, critical factors within a culture is to make sure that you are communicating well and you're communicating clearly. Because again, in the last couple of years of doing what we needed to do to make sure our organizations really survived through the last few years, one of the most important messages from leaders was to make sure that they kept everybody informed of what each organization was doing, as soon as they had the information. So I think that organizations that have done well and have survived through the last few years has continue to keep that, like you mentioned, Meredith, inclusion and making sure that that communication is happening within the organizations. Not sure if anyone else wanted to share anything around that, but if not,
I would say purpose, just something that everyone's working towards, or a reason, some sort of shared connection.
Perfect. That's the other thing too, is making sure that people understand, especially if we've had some shifts in the work that we do, why we're doing what we're doing, and kind of what direction we're heading. So thanks for that. And again, culture can mean many things to people. These are just a couple of things that come to mind around that. It could be the arts, the philosophy that whether it's country, association, group that might be there, could exist within organizations. It could be some of the cultural things, some of the traditions. It could be multiple generations that are part of a culture, and having discussions in settings just like the bottom right, where it's not your traditional, it's not, we've had a lot of changes this past year, couple of years around that. And again, some of the things, one of which Meredith mentioned, communication, one of the key areas for a successful culture. And then making sure we have that purpose that Otto mentioned, that engagement within the culture, and continuing to revisit that, not just on an annual basis, but to regularly visit it. So some of the successful organizations that I have been working with, that communication is often done on a weekly basis. It's not done on a monthly or quarterly basis. It's actually done by leaders on a weekly basis. And hopefully throughout this presentation, I'll also be sharing some best practices that I've learned, as well as we'll get to the Q&A at the end as well. But hopefully, again, if you're not doing some of these practices, you may be able to take that into your organizations and utilize it. For MCM, we specifically have our head partner either send an email or make sure that something's distributed out to everyone to let us know, whether it's a video. Vary your communications. Take a look at different ways you can share that. And again, it is a different message when it's your leaders and your senior leadership team sharing that information versus other people within the organization, depending on the message that you want to share. But when people get nervous about not understanding what's going on and what's happening within the organization as a whole, I definitely suggest your senior leaders, again, leaving a distributed voicemail, maybe doing a video that you send out to everyone, as well as if you have an internal portal of information, that's an easy way to be able to send some information to people. But again, communication and engagement, two really critical pieces. And again, when you think about employee engagement, what does that mean? And again, it could mean different things to different people, but it's really thinking about that emotional commitment and that willingness to give your best at work. It's taking a look and seeing what each individual, what motivates them. as an individual for the organization. When we look at our workplaces, and many of you may have seen this before in terms of the different pieces that you see of an individual. Think about someone starting within your organization. And you see on the surface race, behavior, style, language, and actions that they may take within each of the workplaces. But then when you think about it, there's actually so much more underneath that iceberg. I like this depiction because it kind of gives you that big notice of, yes, you've got these little things up on the top that you see within an organization that's visual, that's physical, that may be present, but within the workplaces, there's so many more things underneath that could happen, including that culture. With a new person coming into the organization, that culture may not be as visual and as present as you think it might be just because you have been within the company for a while. Our values, our experiences, etc., also are incorporated into what we want to look at within the workplace. So when we think about employee engagement, what steps do you think employers can take to increase that? Have you done anything within your organizations right now that you think has helped out? I mentioned the senior leadership communication, for example, that MCM has done. But I was wondering if any of you would like to share any unique things that, or not even unique, but just something that has helped increase engagement within your organizations. Let me call out on people if there's no volunteers.
Hey, Tiffany. This
Yeah.
is Courtney at East
Oh,
Kentucky
great.
Power. And we recently created a diversity and inclusivity team with different people from the organization being on the team. It's relatively new, so it's just fresh off the ground. I don't really know how things have taken off just yet, but we have recently implemented that at East Kentucky.
Great. Thanks for sharing that, Courtney. And I've found a lot of organizations are just starting out with doing that. They may not even have a group put together yet. They may still be discussing, what to do in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But what's important is to continue to have that discussion and to continue to have it present within the organization as something important for everyone to take a look at. Meredith, I know you mentioned that you've also just started forming something.
Yeah, we did. I was just going to make a note that we formed a committee 8 to 12 months ago. And I would say the first year we've done more of the easy, tangible items. And that's because we created some various new scholarships that we have. And then we did a internship program this past summer as well. But the next thing that we are working on is creating a survey, quite honestly, so we can gauge our current employee base of what do they think? Because honestly, right now it's only our perception of what they think. So we want to have a baseline so then we can determine where do we go from here and what programs or education do we need to be focusing on more to increase engagement and inclusion? Because right now it's just our own opinions on what we think.
Sure. No, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. And again, because it is something that may be top of mind for employees, but they just aren't sharing it necessarily at this point. I think doing some type of survey of engagement would be really helpful to just understand what is the buzz out there, right? And what are people talking about that they might not be specifically sharing. So some organizations also conduct town halls where they actually will have these discussions mostly on a quarterly basis, sometimes on a monthly basis, where they not only share operational metrics and what's happening with everything from an operations standpoint, but they intentionally also add their DE&I initiative, or even to bring that up as something that they are working on so that people are at least aware that that's happening within the workplace. Any other organizations that are doing something in terms of increased engagement that has led to hopefully, again, more retention within the organization, which is part of what we're trying to include. So one thing that MCM has done as well is to continuously, every other month, do something in terms of, instead of doing it, because we now have a hybrid workplace where we have 3 days in the office, 2 days at home, you try to kind of figure out different touch points for employees to be able to engage. Maybe it's a luncheon event where we did trivia pursuit, basically. It's kind of a fun little thing. I know it's very, very simple, but we did do breakout rooms and had a chance, because we're a regional office in Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky. It actually made our engagement stronger because we had a chance to talk to others in those different locations. Again, just another idea. Nothing that took a lot of time. Sorry, that's my puppy behind me that is barking. But again, helped increase engagement for everyone in doing that.
I love hearing that, but I'm going to tell you the negative side of what we experienced. So we tried to do a virtual trivia, and same thing, but we actually had an employee that was recently on Jeopardy. So I mean, if that's not the coolest thing ever, right? And so we were trying to get them to be the leader of it, and certainly no issues. We only had 15 people sign up. And so it wasn't even enough to create breakout rooms. So that was really discouraging. And people were complaining that they're just zoomed out and they don't even want to do that. So I'm like, oh, so I'm anxious to hear if there's any other ideas that people are doing, because we are really trying to get people engaged in things like you just mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, at least for our organization, the competition thing is a big thing. So, I mean, just even recently, we had one that was decorating your office for those, or at home for those who were working from home, and for Halloween, and then also pumpkin carving. And we had everything from, you know, their cute, adorable kids holding the pumpkins to get to get the vote, to they had an actual pumpkin carving with like 5 or 6 people, so you could see the different things that they've carved. So again, not just engaging the employees, but their families and others also helps some. So again, it develops. It's not one of those things that's going to happen overnight, but you're right, that could happen, Meredith. We're not enough people participate, but you keep trying, because I think at some point you might find something once you actually send out that survey that people would like to do. Any other ideas from anyone that they can share? So I put the slide up because these are some of the moments that I would say are engageable within each of your workplaces. Sometimes you don't think about it as that, but they really are. From the recruitment process, when you're looking at that piece, attracting someone in, to the onboarding, the orientation process, it's a big one in terms of engagement. And again, that orientation should not just be day one. It should continue on and have check-ins probably for at least the first several months for someone new to the organization, so that they feel comfortable, not only in the setting that they're in, especially if you're in a hybrid schedule with work and you're not physically seeing people, which a lot of our organizations have done that. You want to make sure they continue to understand the culture and understand what your company is all about. You've got training and development opportunities, check-ins, you know, basically having people assigned to be able to touch base and just check in and just see how things are going, not even work related, just more to see how they're doing. Is there anything the company could do to help? Some organizations have sent out kind of randomly, you know, different like Grubhub cards or anything like that, something small, nothing expensive, you know, to try to, again, engage employees and let them know that the company's thinking about them, even though they may be remote in the workplace. And again, all the different areas there on the right that talk about coaching, feedback, regular processes that we have that we might have to do from a virtual standpoint in doing that. And again, very key is communication, not only senior leaders, but their direct manager or supervisor to continue to have that open. And then when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I wanted to give you all kind of a definition around it that, and you see different definitions. This was one that I just, really liked the way it was defined. When you think about diversity, it's that representation, right, of various identities and differences, just in general at the basic level. And when you think about your own organizations, I'm sure at surface level, you may be seeing that diversity, but there's probably even more layers of that, just like that iceberg that I showed that you don't realize. And you only get to know it when you do some of the things like a few of you had mentioned, putting some teams together to look at D&I and look at it intentionally as an organization. Equity. Now, this is a very hot topic that's been in the news and everywhere else, especially around the compensation work that some of you may be doing and benefits. So total rewards, really that equity is a big piece where it's defined there, fair and equitable treatment, access, and opportunity. And the biggest piece of this definition I would kind of share with all of you is that access and opportunity. Because I think sometimes we don't realize until we do some actual analysis of our own internal information within our companies, how much equity could be way off between different races, ages, generations, populations within the workplace. So there are different cuts of data now. A lot of data analytics that companies are looking at, whether small, medium, or large, around their population. It gives you a different perspective. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to increase wages to a certain amount, because as you know, you also have to understand the jobs that they're in, the value of those jobs, their actual performance. So it's not just because you're seeing something in one aspect, you're going to raise those increases. You've got to look at the multiple layers. But in the past, I don't think we've really looked at those factors as much as we are now. So just wanted to share that organizations are looking at that. And then one of the most critical pieces, of course, is inclusion. And it's that effort to create environments to respect and value all people. That's probably the biggest topic. If any of you were able to go to the Kentucky SHRM conference, our president, CEO from National SHRM, actually, Johnny Taylor actually mentioned inclusion first versus diversity and equity, just because he said diversity, we can't help. The world is changing. It's growing into a diverse population. Equity, we're working on. People have been, they can look at data, they can look at information and do some analyzation around it. It's the inclusion piece that he actually mentioned is really critical right now, where we look at the environments we're in and just make sure that we really are being inclusive in that manner. So with I was going to say, how many people do we have? I was going to do a breakout for a couple minutes.
17 people.
We have 17. Okay, great. Well, if you want to try to break us out. So this is kind of an exercise, a simple, pretty exercise. I don't know if any of you have ever done this one before, but basically we're going to break us out into breakout groups. I think we're going to do 3, Autumn.
Yep, that works for me.
So in that activity, if each of you, one of you, be the spokesperson, but think about your name. Just in general, your first name, middle name, last name. You can use a nickname or any name that has a history or a story of significance for you. And talk about that for a few minutes with everyone. And then we'll come back in and kind of report out on a couple of those that you thought were interesting.
All right.
Join.
Great. I think, do we have everybody back on them?
Looks like we're missing 2.
It looks like everyone's back that's still on.
Oh, okay.
Great. Again, from the sessions that you were in, if someone would like to share, because were there 2 or 3 groups that we?
3 groups.
Okay, great. That they'd like to share around the discussion. Maybe I'm going to start calling out names. Andrea or Dan, were you in different groups? This is so much harder online.
Share for our group.
Oh, go ahead.
All right. Hallie, is that, I said it right, right?
Yes.
Okay. Her parents named her after a movie that they saw when they were married or right before they were married, and they named her after a movie. And then Amanda, her family sticks with M names. She has some sisters that have M names, but Amanda does not have an M name, but they sometimes call her Mandy, and her middle name does start with an M. And then Tiffany is unique with her different variety of names with Filipino background. Her dad named her Tiffany after the Tiffany stone. And then Ramos, okay. And that is the Filipino side, but also a little bit on the Hispanic sounding side. And then Cardwell is her married name. And her husband is, did you say Irish, English, and German?
Yep.
Combination. And so people are a little surprised when they meet Tiffany, because Tiffany Cardwell would not resonate with the other background that she, as Filipino. So she surprises folks sometimes with her name.
It does make for interesting conversation, though. And again, it's okay if, you know, I'm not sure if others, Meredith or anyone within your groups, had an interesting story with their names.
Yeah, I mean, I can share. Norma Edwards said that her name is Norma Jean, and she said that her dad had a true love for a country singer. I believe that's right. Norma, correct me if I'm wrong. And so that's where she got her name from. But she said a lot of people will call her Normal, which is very interesting. And then other people will say, oh, not quite normal, because she doesn't have the L. So I thought that was interesting. And Lindsay was also in our group, and she was saying she didn't really have any true nicknames, but her mom dreamed of her name when she was pregnant, and when she had her, she felt like she was the baby in her dream, and so that was her name. So I thought that was kind of cool.
It is cool. But again, this is just like a sample exercise that you can do within your organizations or your teams. That's pretty simple around DE&I, where hopefully, you know, and again, nicknames are a good thing too, that people sometimes will talk about to kind of engage in conversation. And you do learn some interesting things about everyone. So, but thanks again for engaging in that activity really quick and having a chance to share. And again, just some thoughts about diversity, equity, inclusion, just making sure that we think about when we look at opportunities that we provide and reveal those relevant opportunities. We talked about equity, elevating that and analyzing it and just taking some time with that. And then diversity itself, activating that within the organization, and also trying to make sure that you're including others in doing that. And of course, one of the biggest things around that is trust, and just making sure that you've got the respect, that transparency within the organization, the commitment. And this takes a while to get you, especially when you're looking at DE&I. So, but just know that this is where we're trying to go as we look at that within our organizations. And when we think about working, just in general, there are different pieces that we have seen over the last couple of years. We've seen shifts in operations, looking at positions. Many of you probably have reevaluated positions. The expansion to remote work, reliance on technology, and then just employee well-being as a whole became a big topic as well. I put safety measures at the bottom because I think that's something that all of us continue to make sure that we've got the best in safety as we can, depending on the work environment that we're in. So shifts in operations, these are just a couple of different examples of the different things that companies had done, where they shift the products that they had or the services that they had to other things to kind of accommodate for what happened in the last few years. When we look at reevaluating positions, we're seeing more and more cross-functional work within organizations and more opportunities for growth and development. Remote work opportunities, of course, have expanded quite a bit. So that makes it challenging from a talent perspective to, again, recruit and retain our employees. And then staying connected. These are just different ways, again, from a technology standpoint, that all of us stay connected to each other as well as to the workplace. I mentioned well-being. Companies are now adding more around well-being within organizations as part of that engagement, because all of us are in different phases over the last couple of years. Some have the feelings on the left of being overwhelmed, shocked, maybe even anxious and powerless about some of the things that we've experienced throughout the last few years. And we might have some difficulty concentrating and, of course, being just concerned from a family perspective. So when we look at that factor of well-being, it's really important, again, to incorporate that in the whole total comp portion of the workplace. That stress in the workplace, you don't see as much verbiage around work-life balance, but more on work-life integration and making sure that we're looking at companies right now are asking employees to take their time off, making sure that they actually take the time to get away. In some cases, for us, we have to submit, actually it's due in a couple of weeks, if we're going to ask, because we happen to do rollover of 5 days into the new year. If we're going to have more than that, we have to submit our time to make sure that that gets covered. And I know each of you have different PTO type of requirements, but asking for that ahead of time, maybe mid-year, to try to make sure that people are going to take their time is something that I'm seeing organizations do now. And then again, just making sure that they have access in terms of mental health and being able to have that teledoc service that is available. If you haven't looked at that or your organization doesn't have that, a lot of health plans are incorporating it in very easily now. And looking at the path forward, when we see employees looking at jobs or watching for openings, how much are we aware of this within our workplaces? I don't know what kind of turnover everyone's experiencing, but as companies try to make sure that they attract the best and the brightest, they've started shifting some things. For example, flexible time off and leave policies, shifts in their hours have changed. I see a lot of sign-on and retention bonuses. I'm not sure what all of you may be experiencing, but that's something that more and more organizations are putting into place. Incentive plans that go across the board. That's something that, again, organizations are starting to implement. Opportunities for development that tie into whether it's further education, tuition reimbursement, or helping even pay for student loans. Those are different pieces that companies have shifted now. And then, of course, making sure that communications continue to be a big part of what they're doing. So I know there's a lot on this slide, and you'll get copies of this. I'll give this to Meredith and team to be able to share. But this is a slide that kind of helps you think about what does your company give in the center there in terms of employee value. What is the proposition you give? So you've got a lot of different factors around there, but a lot of employees today are looking for basically a clear statement from organizations. You know, why would they come to you as an organization? What is your brand? What is your culture? You know, the culture that we talked about earlier today and incorporating in diversity, equity, and inclusion. There are a lot of stages of that within organizations, and candidates for positions are looking to organizations to be able to talk through some of those pieces and what they're doing as a company. You've got on this employee value proposition, again, you've got the affiliation with the organization, the people themselves, advancement, the work itself, and then the rewards and benefits, and the different pieces that could be tied to that. This is just to help you think about what is it that your company is doing now as a message around that employee life cycle for each of your employees, each of your departments, and what they're getting provided from the company. And then the other pieces are, you've got different generations. I know this is not new to everyone at all. We've got 5 different, generations within the workplace, but there are more and more of different benefits that we're having to look at around all of that. Everything from that legal insurance to possibly student debt assistance, and not just also childcare on one end, but you also have the other end where there's caregiver leaves that companies are looking at as well, because you may have parents that are elderly or maybe facing dementia with a relative you're caring for. I always have to put pet insurance in there because that continues to grow as a benefit. When I talk to different brokers around that, it's not just your core offerings of medical, dental, vision, but it's a little bit more than that. The companies are looking at adding in terms of benefits that they want to provide within their organizations. And then the next couple slides speak to different changes that are happening, whether there are benefits that are being provided, information that you need to kind of keep in mind as we look at culture, as we look at diversity, equity, and inclusion. So the first one there on General Mills, to help employees at different life stages, they're giving different types of leaves around that, and also adding caregiver leave benefit, which some organizations may not have thought about doing in the past. The second change that's happening out there that we're seeing is around DE&I and looking at organizations such as universities. So this is one example of a case study with Syracuse, where they actually had allegations regarding discrimination regarding pay for 5 of their female faculty members. And so you're seeing more and more of these appearing within the marketplace, which is what's important for us is, having comp possibly as part of our role, or even employment just in general, just being in HR, to keep in mind that it's important to take a look and do some analysis internally within our own organizations. We're not going to be at this mark of 3.7 million, right? Just to resolve the claims. But what we want to do is take a look at adjustments that we might want to provide for our employees. And again, a couple of other examples here. Fidelity Investments has a step ahead program that looks at financial burdens for recent grads, and they're offering up to $2,000 a year for student loan repayment. Again, some of you may or may not already be thinking about that, but especially in the healthcare arena, that's a big piece, especially in the nursing area, that people are wanting to take a look at providing as a benefit. And then another one, LinkedIn itself, trying to make a difference in people's lives. Basically, they have a perk up program, which gives employees dollars per quarter to spend on lifestyle perks. that may be wellness related, financial planning related, different things to help employees themselves. And I know that not every organization can provide that, but maybe there's something like that that each of us can think about in terms of that piece. So, does anybody recognize this person?
Ted.
Okay, who said that?
Me. It's a good one.
Courtney. Okay, so some of you may or may not be familiar with Ted Lasso. So it is a show that's currently like a hot show right now. And there was an interesting article that some of you may have seen on LinkedIn that someone from Waste Management had posted that talked about a leader's guide to Ted Lasso. And I'm going to share this because I'm going to tie it in, thought have a little fun to share about the different principles from this show that ties into what we need to think about as comp professionals, or at least one of our hats as comp professionals. So the first one is being an internal optimist and really cultivating an optimistic mindset and trying to really think about how we impact those around us. So again, as we talk about culture and you talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, it's important to try to make sure that we understand what's around us and what can help us be most successful in what we do. The second one was, this was kind of funny, be a goldfish. And the reason why, because goldfish have short memories. So basically giving each of you an opportunity to think about things that you have done in the past really does limit you in the present. So keep things short, and it'll hopefully make you be one of the happiest here on earth. Be egoless, or at least less ego, to ignore any insults, criticism, remain focused on the process you're in to try to make sure that you do what you need to do to accomplish what you need to do every day. And then be curious. So basically, by understanding and being curious and not be judgmental, I think that's the biggest piece here. You ask questions, you active listen, and also you make sure that you help others come to the conclusions that are reached in a non-judgmental pattern. And then also be vulnerable. Life can be challenging, overwhelming, as we talked about over the last couple of years. And the more authentic, open, and accepting people are with the different generations that exist, the better for the workplace. And then again, how does this tie in? The first piece about believing. Processes will continue to evolve, as I've marked there, as companies evolve. And we have to have some trust and some belief, because the traditional comp programs and processes that we might have in place is probably going to shift and change over the next several years. It might be due to compliance. It might be due to our own internal culture shifting. But I think it's important for us to believe and think through those traditional processes and trusting that we as professionals can tweak what we need to do for our own culture within our organizations. And then be a goldfish. We are in a different world today, right? Providing companies and teams the space to learn and basically encourage us to stay in the present and resolve our issues is challenging. But however, even though one solution might not work for the workforce that we have today, we want to continue to develop comp practices and alternatives that will not get us stuck in the mindset of what happened in the past, and look at what can we do moving forward. The piece about being egoless. Comp professionals should continue to learn about the world of D&I. Again, we might not have it as part of our role specifically. However, it impacts our company and our culture. And we need to be thinking about how we incorporate that in the work that we do. It's also important to realize that all of us carry different personal biases. That was part of what we were trying to engage in conversation with the names and thinking about that as an example. for example, with my name in general, where people sometimes are shocked to meet me in person because it, you know, Tiffany Cardwell doesn't necessarily equate to someone who has the background that I have. But again, recognizing this within ourselves and continuing to be aware will just lead to better solutions for our organizations. And then, as I mentioned, being curious and not judgmental. As comp professionals, it's really, really important for us to ask questions now as we look at programs that we want to put in place within our companies. Because the more non-judgmental we are, the more we can come up with some creative solutions for our workforce of today. And then just being authentic, being vulnerable. You know, we need to make sure that we look at the shift in the future and look at these metrics that are in place within our organizations to help make room for an inclusive workplace and help make sure that we are thinking about not only one area of our organization, but the organization as a whole. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and kind of leave room for us to kind of talk. And I don't know if we have any questions that anyone might have. Happy to share any best practices on anything that each of you may be running into right now around D&I comp. But I am getting a lot of requests around analysis of information and taking a look at internal organizations and different cuts of data that probably we didn't think about in the past around that piece.
Yeah, I might start with a question. So as
Sure.
a team, we are trying to put together some sort of a survey to survey our workforce so we can determine really a starting point of where we go from here. And do you think it's best, or have you seen from your clients perhaps, that we administer that on our own, or should we do that with an outside vendor? I think once we get the data, we're going to need outside assistance, like you said, to
Sure.
analyze what we get from that. But
Right.
do you think it's appropriate that we administer the survey on our own, or just go outside for that? Because we want to make sure that people are open and honest
Yeah.
in how they answer.
A lot of that, Meredith, does deal with the culture that your company would be. I've seen it done within organizations where people were very good about answering and being authentic about the answers that they had. But the majority, I would say, were not, unless it was an outside party.
Okay.
So it might cost a little bit more, but it does also give you better results on people not being uncomfortable. And even then, even if you use an outside party, there are still going to be skeptical employees that will, you know, be like, oh, well, how did they not know, you know, where that could lead to? So, but most of the time I've seen it effective when it's done externally.
Okay. That's kind of what we thought.
Good question, though, on that. Any other questions from anyone on? I was trying to see if there's anything on the chat. Oh, someone had to leave earlier.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any directed towards the greater population of questions, unless they send something to you directly.
Yeah, no, on that. And again, this is a topic that'll continue to be coming up within the workplace as a whole. So again, hopefully, as you have a chance to take a look at the slides that I'm going to be sharing, you can refer back to some of this information and kind of think through that with your groups and your organizations and what you're trying to put together in terms of DE&I for your workplace.
Well, if we don't have any other questions, certainly pipe up if you do, or put them in the chat. Thank you very much, Tiffany. I know this is very relevant I would assume with most all of us, because like you said, if we're not directly involved in it, I would think that most of us have some indirect involvement just because it's an ever moving target in our space of work. So hopefully this was very beneficial to you, as it was to me. So I really appreciate you coming and sharing this with us today.
Sure, and I've got my contact info in the slides. So in case anyone has any specific questions that they have just within their own organization, again, part of this is just continued education on this topic. It's not usually, sometimes the companies that I have worked with, it's an uncomfortable topic a lot of times to have discussion on. But I think, again, I appreciate the fact that you all were willing to kind of hear, listen, and see some of the information that's here, because hopefully that will then help you with what you're trying to do within each of your organizations as well.
I agree. And we will send out, as Tiffany noted, we'll send out the presentation. And along with that will be our SHRM and HRCI credits. And as always, we'll be sending out our survey. So please share any specific topics or ideas that you'd like to see in future meetings, as we are starting to build our calendar for next year. And if you have any specific notes to add, we always have places where you can add your feedback. So we certainly appreciate that. But if there's no other questions, I think we are right at the top of the hour. So we kept it right at the time frame that we were supposed to. So I appreciate everyone's involvement and time. And thank you very much, Tiffany, because this was a very relevant topic.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And again, please, encourage, if they weren't able to attend, to, reach out if there's anything I can help them with.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thanks, you guys. Have a great day.
Bye.